I never thought my past would come back to haunt me, let alone threaten the life I'd carefully built. Yet here I am, standing in a fragile piece, wondering when that distant world I once inhabited would shatter everything I now hold dear. My name is Cynthia Brooks, and although I wear a new name, a new life, I can still feel the shadow of who I was trailing close behind. There was a time when I thought I could bury my past, seal it up, and throw away the key. But life doesn't work like that, does it? Growing up, we had next to nothing. My family wasn't wealthy, not even close, but we were proud, and for the longest time, I believed that pride alone could keep us safe. I worked as a bartender, pulling long shifts in a dimly lit, smoky bar. It was hard work, thankless and exhausting, but at least it was honest. I'd lean against the sticky counters, wiping the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, and dream of a way out. I wanted more, not just for myself, but for my family. I thought about college, about stability, about one day earning enough to look my mother in the eyes and tell her she didn't have to worry anymore. But dreams can turn desperate, and the need to break free, to escape that relentless grind, eventually becomes unbearable. Then, there was the allure, the glittering, dangerous allure of quick money, seductive and insistent. I can still remember those first moments of temptation, the way the idea of it felt like both a thrill and a betrayal. The whispers of an expensive, glamorous life sparkled in my mind, all the things I'd never had but felt I deserved. Clothes, luxury, power, respect. It's strange, really, how something as fragile as money can make you feel untouchable, even when you're drowning in it. The thought of living a life beyond bills and budget constraints took root in my mind like a wild weed, and I convinced myself it would be temporary, just long enough to give my family a real shot at security. But reality was far crueler. My mother's diabetes worsened, and the medical bills for her insulin and other treatments stacked up higher and higher, thick, heavy envelopes piling up on our kitchen table. There was no health insurance to lean on, no backup plan, only the stark reality that I had to be the one to keep my family afloat. Stopping my new line of work wasn't an option, not now. The thought of walking away, of watching my mother suffer without treatment, left a pit in my stomach. I couldn't let her endure that. So, I told myself I had to do what was necessary, even if it meant selling my dignity piece by piece. I numbed myself to the shame, built walls around my heart, and let those walls harden as I slipped deeper into a life that felt less like living and more like surviving. It was a rainy Tuesday, and I had taken my mother to the hospital for one of her regular checkups. The fluorescent lights overhead glowed across the worn leather seats in the waiting room. I was tense, my fingers gripping the edges of the chair as I watched nurses rush back and forth and listened to the rhythmic hum of medical monitors. The worry about how I would pay for her medications, or if she would even get the care she needed, gnawed at me. The anxiety and exhaustion of hiding my own secrets layered over the familiar ache of seeing her suffer. Then, I noticed him. He was across the room, looking intently at the nurse's desk, his face a mixture of quiet worry and gentle resolve. He looked out of place, like he'd stepped in from another world. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a soft shine, and he held himself with an air of calm authority. But it was his expression, a warm, concerned gaze and a gentle smile, that first drew me in. I watched as he spoke to the nurse, his voice low and comforting, the way someone speaks when they want to soothe a restless child. I learned later that he'd come in a hurry after hearing about his aunt's accident. She was his only family in town, and he had dropped everything to be by her side. For a few moments, we caught each other's eyes from across the room. There was a kindness in his gaze that softened the edges of my own fears, a calm I hadn't felt in years. Before I realized it, he'd taken the seat next to me, and our conversation started with small talk, how long we'd been waiting, the discomfort of hospitals. But soon, his steady presence put me at ease, and our talk shifted to memories of childhood, dreams, life in the city, the people we loved and worried about. His laughter came easily, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to fill the sterile hospital air with warmth. Sitting there with him, I felt both vulnerable and protected. I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was meant to happen, that somehow In this crowded waiting room with its buzzing fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs, I had met someone who saw beyond the polished exterior I presented to the world. As we talked, I felt layers of myself peeling back, showing more of who I was or who I wanted to be. But behind every laugh, every shared look, there was a hollow ache inside me. I knew I could never tell him the truth. I couldn't let this good, decent man know about the life I led outside these hospital walls. He was everything I wasn't: secure, confident, full of integrity. He spoke about his job, his family, his ambitions with such genuine passion and grace. In the warmth of his gaze, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. The thought terrified me. He seemed too good, too perfect, like someone out of a story I didn't deserve to be a part of. For the first time in a long while, I felt fear. Not the fear I knew from my life on the streets, but a fear that was even sharper. The fear of losing him, of somehow ruining this connection we'd just begun to form. He was everything I had dreamed of but never believed I could have, and yet here he was, right beside me. As he scribbled his number on the back of a crumpled receipt and placed it gently into my hand, I felt a flicker of something fragile and beautiful, a hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be different. As the weeks went by, Joe and I grew closer, and with each passing day, I found myself captivated by him. He was everything I had longed for but never truly believed I deserved. A man whose very presence brought a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. He was strikingly handsome, with a calm confidence that drew me in, yet it was his gentle nature that melted every last offense I had. Joe listened in a way no one else ever had, really taking in each word, each nuance, like what I said mattered. He'd laugh at my stories, nod thoughtfully at my dreams, and even share little details of his own life, his ambitions, his family memories, his small, ordinary struggles. Every conversation with him felt like a gift, a moment suspended in time that I wanted to hold onto forever. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep living the way I was. Each time he looked at me with those warm, trusting eyes, a pang of guilt stabbed through me. How could I reconcile the woman he saw with the life I had lived, the choices I'd made? I began to feel nauseated at the mere thought of continuing down that path. The clients, the cheap, hollow exchanges, they didn't compare to even 1 second of the genuine connection I felt with Joe. I couldn't imagine him finding out about my past. The thought of his face twisted in betrayal was unbearable. I could already feel his disapproving silence, his back turned to me in disappointment. I couldn't lose him, not after finding someone who saw me as something more, something good. So, I made a promise to myself, a solemn vow that I would leave that life behind for good. I told myself that the money, the lifestyle, none of it was worth the risk of losing him. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I wanted to be worthy of him, to have a fresh start. Every time he held my hand, it felt like he was pulling me into a future I'd never dared to hope for, one that was filled with love, respect, and the kind of happiness that doesn't need to be bought. Then, a few months later, Joe knelt down on one knee, and I couldn't hold back the tears. The joy was overwhelming, blinding almost, as I heard him say the words I had been silently wishing for. In that instant, I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took my breath away. I didn't hesitate, didn't even let him finish his proposal before I whispered, yes. It felt like everything I had ever dreamed of was finally within my reach. As he slid the ring onto my finger, I made another promise to myself. I would be the woman he believed me to be. I would bury my past deep where it could never harm us. After that day, I tried to leave my old life behind completely, but it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I woke up each morning next to Joe, feeling like I had been granted a second chance, thanking God for the love we shared and the new life that seemed to stretch out before us. But there was always a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind, a whisper that reminded me of the secrets I still carried. It felt like a weight on my chest, growing heavier each time I looked at him. How could I ever tell him the truth? How could I risk shattering the perfect life we were building together? Joe was everything I'd ever wanted. I adored the way he looked at me, like I was his whole world, and it terrified me that one day he might see me for who I really was. For a while, things were perfect. We were happy, and I thought maybe I could bury my past and keep it there. But living in the same town where everything had happened made it hard. I was always on edge, wondering if someone from that old life would recognize me, if Joe would somehow find out. Then, on our first wedding anniversary, Joe decided to surprise me with a night out. He told me to dress up for dinner, and I wore one of my favorite dresses, a fitted, floral number that hugged my curves just right. The restaurant was upscale, romantic, everything you'd hope for on a special night. We were having a wonderful time, laughing, talking, enjoying each other's company. But then Joe excused himself to use the restroom, and my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but the message stopped my heart. It was from one of my old clients. He was at the restaurant, watching us. He asked how much Joe had paid me for the night and said he'd double it if I joined him instead. The shame washed over me like a tidal wave. I wanted to tell him the truth, to let him know the man with me was my husband, but I couldn't. I looked around the room, scanning the faces, but I couldn't find him. The message ruined the evening. By the time Joe returned to the table, I was ready to leave. Joe noticed my change in mood but didn't ask questions. He simply agreed when I suggested we go home. The drive back was silent, my mind racing. What would happen if Joe found out? Could I keep this secret forever, or was it just a matter of time before it came crashing down? A few days later, my worst fear became reality. That same client called again, furious that I'd ignored him at the restaurant. He'd done his research and knew Joe was my husband. His threat was clear. If I didn't meet him, he would reveal everything to Joe. I felt trapped. I didn't know what to do. Telling Joe the truth would devastate him, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But meeting my old client felt like an equally terrible betrayal. When the appointed day came, I made my decision. I told Joe I'd be visiting my family on the other side of town, then drove to the hotel. I told myself it was to protect my marriage, but deep down, I knew it was a choice I'd regret. The hotel was familiar, a place I'd been many times before, though it felt darker now, like a shadow of the past I tried to forget. He was waiting in one of the rooms, lounging with a smug, twisted smile that twisted my stomach. The air felt thick, stale, as if the room itself bore witness to what was about to happen. I could feel the walls pressing in on me, reminding me of every time I'd been here before, back when this was all I knew. He greeted me with a look that was both familiar and terrifying, the kind of look that seemed to say he had me exactly where he wanted me. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile that I hoped could mask the shame pooling inside me. My mouth felt dry, and my heartbeat thudded loudly in my chest, the anxiety creeping into every inch of my skin. He didn't waste a single moment. His hand was on me before I could even process the full weight of what I was doing, trailing down my back with a grip that was firm, territorial, as if I were an object he had every right to claim. His touch sent a chill through me, and I tried to disconnect, to mentally step outside of myself and let my mind go blank. I wanted to become invisible, a shadow that could slip away unnoticed. But my body betrayed me, responding instinctively, even against my will. The mix of emotions was dizzying, a knot of guilt so tight it was suffocating, layered with something else, something darker that I didn't want to name. Joe was always gentle, always treating me with respect, as if I were fragile. But this man wasn't. His hands moved roughly, unapologetically, as if he knew every inch of the control he held over me, and he used it mercilessly. I felt myself slipping back into that old version of me, the one who accepted this life, who tolerated this treatment, and a wave of nausea hit me as I realized how close the person still was, lingering in the corners of my soul. This roughness, this callous disregard, it was the darkness I thought I'd left behind, a life I thought was buried in my past. But here it was, staring me in the face, refusing to let me escape. When it was over, he left without a word, leaving me alone in the quiet, stale air that now felt thicker, almost choking. I sat there, dazed, my body and mind numb with shock. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady as I gathered my clothes. I dressed in silence, each movement slow, heavy, as if my body carried the weight of every regret, every misstep. The guilt settled in my chest like lead, and I could feel its cold, crushing weight spreading through me, anchoring me to the ground. Joe's face flashed in my mind, his smile, his gentle hands, the way he looked at me with such trust and love. Joe didn't deserve any of this. He didn't deserve the lies, the betrayal, the secrets. He was good, kind, loving, everything I dreamed of finding. And here I was, tearing apart the very life he'd given me, betraying the man who had offered me a second chance. I hated myself with a fervor I couldn't describe. The hatred burned, deep and raw, wrapping around my insides like a vice, squeezing every last ounce of my self-worth out of me. I hated myself for being here, for betraying Joe, for keeping secrets from the one person who believed in me. But even more, I hated that I still hadn't found the courage to tell him the truth, that I kept a part of myself hidden from the one person who had shown me unconditional love. The shame was a tidal wave, pulling me under with relentless force, filling my lungs until I couldn't breathe. As I walked out of that hotel room, I felt shattered, like a glass barely holding together, ready to splinter at any moment. I drove home in silence, numb and cold, the city lights flashing by in a blur. With each mile, I promised myself that this would be the last time, that I would make things right, and that somehow I would find a way to be worthy of Joe's love. But as the guilt sank deeper, I knew it was a promise I didn't fully understand how to keep.